Today, we're diving deep inside our own bodies. We're going to go on a quest, following a single molecule of sugar as it gets transformed into pure, usable energy. So, have you ever really wondered how that happens? How a single bite of food can power something as complex as your brain? I mean, it's something we don't really think about, but it's happening every single second. You know that apple you had for a snack? Yeah, that's literally fueling your thoughts as you listen to this. The secret? Well, it's all in a fundamental biological process. And that process is called glycolysis. The name kind of gives it away, right? It literally means sugar splitting. This is the main number one pathway our bodies use to break down carbs and get energy. And where does all this magic happen? Right in the cytosol. That's the gooey, jelly-like stuff that fills up all of our cells. Okay, so this is our roadmap for the whole energy quest. Now, I know, it looks super complex, maybe even a little intimidating, but don't worry. Just think of it like a 10-step chemical recipe that pretty much every living cell on the planet uses. We're going to break it down and walk through it step by step. So let's start with part 1, the investment phase. And yeah, you heard that right. Our quest actually begins kind of counterintuitively by spending energy. It's like that old saying, you got to spend money to make money. Well, our cells are basically tiny little entrepreneurs. They get it. All right, let's look back at our map. See that first section? We're right there in what's called the preparatory phase. The goal here is super simple. We just need to take our nice, stable glucose molecule and get it all prepped and ready for the main event, the big split. And how does it do that? Well, it invests 2 molecules of its energy currency, ATP. You should really think of ATP as the cell's version of cash. So right now, the cell is spending $2 just to get this whole operation off the ground. So this investment happens in 2 really key moments. First, one ATP molecule is used to basically trap the glucose inside the cell so it can't escape. Then, a second ATP comes in for a super crucial rate-limiting step. You can think of that as the main on-off switch for the entire pathway. After these 2 steps, that sugar molecule is now all wobbly and unstable, perfectly ready for what's coming next. And bam, here's the immediate payoff for that investment. That unstable 6-carbon sugar gets sliced right down the middle. Just like that, we now have 2 smaller 3-carbon molecules. The prep work, it's officially over. Okay, so we've spent our 2 ATP, we've split our sugar molecule in half. Now it's time for the part we've all been waiting for, the big energy payoff. This is where the cell really starts to rake in the profits. Let's check our map again. We are now entering the second half of the pathway, often called the oxidation or payoff phase. And this is where things get exciting, because each one of those 2 3-carbon molecules we made is about to generate a fantastic return on that initial $2 investment. And this is absolutely key to remember. From this point forward, everything happens twice. Why? Because we split that one glucose into 2 smaller molecules. So every energy-producing step we're about to see, it's doubled. Double the molecules, double the reward. Simple as that. So what exactly are we harvesting here? Well, our quest yields 3 amazing treasures. First, we get more ATP, that's our direct spendable cash. Second, we get these things called NADH molecules. Think of these like high-energy paychecks that the cell can cash in for a lot more ATP later on. And finally, we get 2 pyruvate molecules. This is the final product, and it holds the key to unlocking even more energy down the line. So in total, this payoff phase generates 4 new molecules of ATP. And that makes sense, right? We have 2 of those 3-carbon molecules, and each one gives us 2 ATP. 2 times 2 is 4. But wait, we can't forget about our startup costs. We have to subtract the 2 ATP we invested at the very beginning just to get this whole thing started. So you're probably thinking the net gain is 2 ATP, right? I mean, 4 minus 2 is 2. Easy. But actually, it's a little more complicated than that. The total energy profit, well, that depends entirely on one crucial factor. And that factor brings us to a major fork in the road of our quest. The final fate of our pyruvate molecules and our total energy count, it all comes down to one simple question. Is there any oxygen around? Okay, so there are 2 paths. If there's oxygen present, we call it aerobic glycolysis. In this case, pyruvate is our end product, and those high-energy NADPH paychecks head off to the respiratory chain to be cashed in for big bucks. But if there's no oxygen, that's anaerobic glycolysis. And in that scenario, the end product isn't pyruvate anymore. It gets converted into a molecule called lactate.
Let's actually tally up the ATP, starting with the aerobic path, the one with oxygen. Remember those NADH paychecks? Well, they get cashed in at the cell's powerhouses, the mitochondria. And each NADH is worth about 3 ATP. Since we have 2 of them, that's a bonus of 6 ATP. So we add that to the 4 we made directly, that's 10, subtract our initial 2 ATP investment, and we get a net gain of 8 ATP. That is a fantastic return.
Now, what about when there's no oxygen? Well, that whole respiratory chain, the bank for our NADH paychecks, it shuts down. The NADH can't be cashed in. So in this case, our net gain is just 2 ATP. That's it. This is exactly what's happening in your muscles when you're doing an all-out sprint and you can't get enough oxygen in. So you might be asking, why even bother converting pyruvate to lactate? Well, it's actually a really clever trick. This conversion process recycles a key molecule that's needed for an earlier step in glycolysis to keep going. So by doing this, the cell can keep churning out that little bit of ATP, even when oxygen is super scarce. It's a lifesaver, really. Okay, so this whole pathway isn't just some cool diagram in a textbook. It is absolutely 100% essential for life. And when parts of this incredible metabolic factory break down, well, the consequences can be really, really serious. So let's look at a real-world clinical connection. There's an enzyme called pyruvate kinase. It's the one that carries out one of the final big ATP-generating steps. So what happens if someone has a genetic deficiency and their body just can't make this enzyme properly? Well, without that key enzyme, ATP production inside red blood cells just tanks. And here's the thing, red blood cells rely almost entirely on glycolysis for their energy. So without enough ATP, they can't maintain their nice round shape. They get all distorted and weird looking, and they end up getting destroyed by the spleen. This whole situation leads to a condition called hemolytic anemia, and it just perfectly illustrates how vital every single step of this pathway is for our health. But let's end on a high note. For a healthy cell, the story is far from over. That pyruvate molecule, the final treasure of our glycolysis quest, it's like a master key. It can go on to unlock pathways that generate absolutely massive amounts of more energy, or it can be used as a building block for other things the cell needs. So the end of this quest is really just a beginning of the next one. It's pretty amazing, right? How one simple sugar molecule can fuel the entire incredibly complex city that is a living cell.